Good evening. One of Boston's most dangerous intersections will be the subject of a public meeting tonight in Mattapan. The crossroads of Morton Street and Gallivan Boulevard will be redesigned and rebuilt over the next 2 years, part of a $3.2 million project aimed at improving Route 203. Now, this evening's meeting starts at 6 o'clock at the Mildred Ave School Auditorium. The intersection, as you may believe, was the scene of 20 crashes over a 3-year period between 2012 and 2014. Of those, about 20 people were recorded with injuries in those accidents. It's a very busy crossroads and a dangerous one, right in front of the Boston Fire Department's Engine 16 firehouse. Officials intend to install new signals and median strips, and a new turning lane will be added for eastbound Morton Street traffic. Improvements are also planned at the intersection of Morton and West Selden Streets. A new traffic signal will be installed there, and there'll be a protected left turn lane for Morton Street traffic. Bicycle lanes will also be added from West Selden Street to Gallivan. More details on the project's timing should come to light at tonight's meeting. Again, it starts at 6 o'clock at the Mildred Avenue School. Well, the owner of a Dorchester-based construction firm hopes to demolish his existing office building near Peabody Square, and he'd replace it with, of course, a 5-story mixed-use complex with 20 apartments. The plans were shown to the members of the Ashmont Adams Neighborhood Association at their monthly meeting last Thursday. The project is large enough to trigger a review process from the Boston Planning and Development Agency, or the BPDA. Stephen Conley of Conley Construction, he's the proponent. He will appear before the membership of the St. Mark's Area Civic Association, likely in February. According to plans shown to the reporter, the new building will also house 2 commercial units on the ground level. The current proposal estimates that 24 parking spaces will be included on the site. Leaders in Columbia's Savin Hill continue to juggle a number of development proposals of their own. One of them is a still emerging plan to transform the current site of the Scally and Trayers Funeral Home. That's on Pleasant Street. It would be turned into housing. The funeral home continues to operate right now and plans to continue through the summer, but it has been sold already to a new owner. His name is Giuseppe Arcari. He bought it last July for $1.6 million. Arcari now plans to build a new building on that site, which will house 17 apartments with an underground parking garage. The Boys and Girls Clubs of Dorchester and a roster of legendary Boston Bruins alumni will face off in a charity hockey game next Saturday in Dorchester. The game will take place at the Divine Ice Rink in Neponset. It's on January 28th at 4:30 p.m. Legendary former Bruins like Terry O'Reilly and Rick Middleton will be on the Bees team, along with some more recent players. After the game, the teams will gather with friends and fans at a 21-plus party at Florian Hall. The Florian time starts at 7 o'clock. And all proceeds from these events are going to go to support the club. Tickets for the game are just $10, and tickets to both the game and the post-reception are $35 per person. Well, an acclaimed writer from the past is returning to Dorchester and Boston after an absence of some 230 years. Actress Valerie Fox will portray Phyllis Wheatley. She was a colonial Boston slave who became the first black poetess published in America. Fox will welcome guests to connect with Wheatley through her portrayal starting this Saturday. It will start at 10 to 1 at the Great Hall in Cobden Square. It's, by the way, the same venue as the Winter Farmers Market, which will be going on at the same time. The event with Phyllis Wheatley is co-sponsored by the Dorchester Historical Society and the Cobden Square Neighborhood Council, and they'll continue for 2 subsequent Saturdays, January 28th and February 2nd. You can learn much more about this event and Wheatley's connection to Boston in today's edition of the Dorchester Reporter. You can read that online at .news.com. And finally tonight, on the eve of the presidential inauguration, a group of activists plan to stage an event tonight at the Strand Theater that's being billed as a, quote, counter-inaugural celebration of resistance, end quote. The event is slated to run from 7 to 11 and it includes a march, a protest march, from Mary Hannon Park to the Strand Theater right at the beginning. More details on the counter-inaugural can be found online at togetherweriseboston.org. That's the news tonight from Dorchester. I'm Bill Forry of The Reporter. And now back to you, Chris.
Bill, I want to ask you, of course, about one other ceremonial event covered recently, and that is the Mayor's State of the City address.
Yeah.
We're always curious about what he's got planned, and I guess there were some things that you were maybe expecting, but you didn't hear too much about.
Well, there were things that were in last year's speech, for instance, about planning. And of course, in Dorchester right now, as you can tell from our reporting, your reporting too, it's really besieged at the moment with development projects. What we didn't hear much about is how the city intends to coordinate that through planning. And we know that the city does have plans, as the mayor announced at last year's State of the City, to launch a whole new planning initiative in Glover's Corner, which people may know is the intersection of Freeport Street, Dorchester Ave, and Hancock Street. Massive potential there, a huge industrial area all around it. It's where the city's largest bus depot is, that people probably know. And that wasn't mentioned in the speech. Neither was there mention of Columbia Point, which is another major development issue that's right now being it's a bit chaotic, frankly, and could use some city guidance, I feel, to help disentangle some of the uses there. The Boston Globe site being a major piece of that. Also, the former Bayside Expo Center, which has been in the news, both here in the Reporter and in the Boston Globe and other places, as a major potential redevelopment there. So curious that those weren't mentioned. Of course, this is a laundry list speech, which was heavy at the end on national themes as well.
Well, even aside from some of those disputes among the property owners on the peninsula, we're talking about some dramatic changes, possibly a soccer stadium, more transit-oriented housing. Then you've got the rising sea levels to factor in down the line. I mean, it sounds like you need a serious planning process to really thrash all that up.
One would think, and there was one, right? There was a task force that convened for 3 years and developed a master plan for Columbia Point that was published in 2011. It's already a fairly stale document and hasn't really been, frankly, that useful to date in terms of its actual efficacy. It hasn't been employed. But we at the Reporter have called on the administration, the Walsh administration, to rekindle that effort and to try to revise the existing plan to account for things like UMass's ownership of Bayside Expo and what they may do with it, as well as the Boston Globe and the other sites adjacent to it.
What's also interesting about State of the City is the timing. It's at the usual time, but it comes a little after Tito Jackson announced his candidacy for mayor, and he's the city councilor who's the great champion of the schools. And there was, I guess, an answer to that in some of the mayor's speeches.
Yeah, I think the heart of the mayor's speech really was education, and that was no accident. I don't think that would have been different had Tito Jackson not announced the week before. It is kind of, I think, always the central theme of State of the City addresses is how are we doing with public education and what's the plan? Obviously, the mayor spent a lot of time in the middle of his speech dealing with specific initiatives such as adding free pre-K for 4-year-olds, contingent on the legislature's approval, of course, and the money that he expects to get from the convention center revenues. So lots of intangibles there, really. But the mayor has a vision that he put forward. I thought Councilor Jackson's critique of the mayor, obviously, much of it hinges on education, but it goes beyond that, and it involves kind of the two Boston theme that we've heard before. We heard it from John Conley's campaign as well, that there's a city that's being left behind on all kinds of indicators. So there's a legitimate critique there, one that is not just directed at Mayor Walsh, but at city mayors all over the country, and how Marty Walsh contends with that critique in response to it. We had certainly glimmers of that in his speech this week, but it was also a conventional State of the City speech, sprinkled heavily at the end with a mayor who sees himself as having a national leadership role here to counter and to offer resistance to the new administration in Washington.
Well, that's the other bookend here in the timeline is that the President-elect Donald Trump's going to take office very soon. But talk about that. I couldn't resist looking at that as a strategy by the mayor that I'm not going to attack an opponent. At least I'm going to maybe affirm something that a lot of people believe in.
And it certainly had that effect in the room. It turned really into a campaign rally for the last minute and a half of that speech, and I think people at home could sense that. It was very effective, and of course that's a friendly audience, but pivoting away just from Boston, kind of getting into the weeds of just Boston issues where Councilor Jackson might gain some traction, actually, on some weak points in the Walsh administration, and really galvanizing people around the looming threat, really, of things like immigration, the the changes, the wholesale changes that could be coming soon, has an effect of galvanizing people who may not be on your team yet. So smart strategy there, and I think we'll see more of it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bill Forry from the Dorchester Reporter.